Hey, what's up guys? This is Anthony from AnthonysCustoms, and for this video, we're going to be reviewing Spider-Man Homecoming. So, this is probably the most anticipated movie of the year, aside from maybe Justice League. And I only say that because we've already had so many Spider-Man movies in the past decade. Or has it been more than a decade yet? I don't know. But there's been a ton. So people are really excited for this one because it's a new movie, obviously. And then people are excited for Justice League because it's the first time we're going to get the Justice League ever. So I bet these two are going to be the top two movies of the year. We'll see. But as far as this movie goes, as many people had hoped, it is easily the best Spider-Man movie we've gotten, by far. But that's not really a fair comparison. The past Spider-Man movies were plagued with problems, whether it be the actor cast as Spider-Man, or the general direction of the movies, or whatever it was. There was a lot of problematic things. There were a lot of problematic things. I personally didn't mind Tobey Maguire, but he wasn't exactly what we needed. And then, there were issues. So it's not really a fair comparison. They've had a lot of time to practice to get this one right. So it's not fair. So let's just push that aside. Let's talk about this movie on its own merits. Let's try to get rid of any hype for Spider-Man or any comparisons to maybe lesser movies, okay? So we're going to try to make this as objective as possible. Now, it's a little bit later. We've seen the movie now, most of us probably, a few times, so I will have spoilers in this video. I'm not going to save them for the end necessarily. I'm not going to censor what I'm saying, so I may say things that could spoil it. So if you haven't seen it, by chance, go watch it, then come back and watch this video, okay? Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about is the cast. The cast is probably the most important thing, and they nailed it. It's just great. Tom Holland is perfect. In fact, I would argue, and you'll see as we go through this review all the different things I talk about, Tom Holland is the reason for the success of this movie other than Spider-Man being a popular character. He carried the movie by far. He's perfect for Spider-Man. I don't have any complaints at all about his character. The way he does Peter Parker, the way he does Spider-Man, all of it. It's perfectly fine. He is by far the best part of the movie and by far the best Spider-Man. No question about it. Now we have the villain, Vulture, Michael Keaton. How does he do? Well, it's Michael Keaton. He's going to do a good job. He does a really good bad guy. He's very good at having these little nuances in his characters, and he does a good job. So I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with that. I do have some fairly serious problems with the writing for his character, but that's not his fault, so no big deal there. He does a great job. Okay, the next character we need to talk about is Ned. I don't know the actor's name. I can't remember it. I don't know what it is. But that's Spider-Man's best friend, and he does a really good job at being that best friend / sidekick character. He does a great job. He's more important in the movie, I would say, than Vulture, or than anybody else other than Spider-Man. He's got the most screen time, I would bet. I didn't count it, but I think that's what it is. And he does a really good job, so no complaints there. And then the last one I want to talk about is May. People are making a big deal out of Aunt May this time. I don't see why. She does a good job, but it's just not... It's Aunt May, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference. I guess because he's younger, she's going to have more of a role in the movies, but... she does a fine job, but it's not a big deal, so we're not going to talk about that anymore. So the casting's pretty good. Everybody else, all these other secondary characters, they're still fine. I can't think of any that stand out as being a problem, so it's good. It's all good. Didn't like Flash Thompson. There was something off about Flash Thompson. Didn't care for him very much, but what are you going to do? Okay, so moving on. The writing. How was the writing for this movie? I've heard some people say the movie felt a little bit like a Saturday morning cartoon. It wasn't the most mature or developed writing. It was just kind of amateurish. Not amateurish, that's not the word. Juvenile, I guess, would be a better way of doing it, or saying it. And I can see where that's coming from, but I don't think so for the most part. I think for the most part it was pretty good. The dialogue, I think, was fantastic. I think it felt very natural. The things people said were realistic for the most part for the situations, so I don't have a problem with the writing in that regard. And even overall, most of it I think is pretty good. There are some definite issues when it comes to plot and some specific instances where the writing I think is just there for the sake of making a movie, and it feels off. It feels weird. One of those instances, and the biggest instance I think, is Michael Keaton's character, the Vulture. He goes from just being a normal guy doing his job to wanting to murder people on a regular basis and just being totally evil. And it just doesn't feel natural at all. There's no progression. He goes from being normal to being a highly dangerous, volatile weapons dealer and being willing to kill people. Like, that's a huge jump. And there's a time skip in the movie for that, but there's no character development. And he's still, as far as we can tell, like a nice guy, a normal guy, other than the fact that he wants to murder people. It felt very forced to me. And I don't blame Michael Keaton, because it's not his fault that that's the way they did it, but it just felt weird. Like, they never gave a good reason other than he kept saying, I'll do whatever I need to provide for my family. No, that just didn't feel right. It's not the biggest deal. It didn't kill the movie by any means, but it was just very awkward for me that he got so evil so fast and without any real reason other than, the government took my job. Like, that's not quite right. I don't get that. Okay, so the other issue I have with the writing is the overall plot. Now, I'm pretty sure, I didn't look it up, I didn't find sources, and it doesn't really matter, but I'm pretty sure they said at one point that this movie was not going to be an origin story. We already saw Spider-Man perform fairly well in the Civil War movie, so we didn't really need that. We've already had so many origin stories for Spider-Man, we can just kind of skip most of that, give him a little bit of build-up, but then move into being Spider-Man. So that's what I thought this movie was going to be. And it turns out that it was really a 2-hour origin story, which isn't inherently bad. It's fine. But, now don't, just let me finish. I know what you're thinking. Hey, who cares if it's an origin story? That's fine. I don't care either. Except for the fact that we already saw him perform at a very high level in Civil War against some of the Avengers. Now, Tony Stark does make the comment that if Cap wanted to beat you, he would have. But Spider-Man was still holding his own, like, fairly well against, who was it, Bucky and Falcon? Like, no problem at all. So, that's a bit iffy. But here's the other thing. It's a 2-hour movie. They didn't need to spend the entire time having Spider-Man get his ass kicked, which is what happened every step of the way. I get they were trying to show that he's a kid and he's learning how to be this superhero. We didn't need it for the entire... I mean, even the final fight against Vulture, he still loses. The only reason Vulture loses ultimately is because his suit blows up. Otherwise, Spider-Man got his ass kicked again. He loses every single fight. Or fails at whatever he's trying to accomplish, whether it's the boat scene or the elevator scene. He failed like 5 different times in the elevator scene. Yes, he finally did save the day, but just barely. And not with any grace. And so it was just kind of irritating for me to watch this movie where we already saw him perform really well. And if they wanted to do an origin movie or a part where, he had to realize he's not all-powerful, he needs to learn how to develop his skills and stuff, that's fine, but not the entire movie. I would like to have seen that for like the first hour, and then the second hour he actually does some Spider-Man type stuff. That's all I'm saying. It doesn't kill the movie, and I'm sure most people didn't even think of it, but for me, I did not want another 2-hour origin story for a character we've seen perform well in this particular universe already. That's all. And then the other thing that goes kind of with this, there are very few instances of Spider-Man performing like Spider-Man. They have a few scenes, like when he's talking to the suit and she's showing him all these different features of the suit and all these different options for the web lines and things like that. It's never utilized in the movie, at least not to any real extent. He almost always just does the most generic type of thing. And I get that, again, he's still a kid, he's still learning how to do it, but for 2 hours we watched him not be successful and not do many very Spider-Man-like things. For instance, the scene where he's climbing the Washington Monument to save the people in the elevator. That's a pretty long scene, it's very drawn out, and most of that scene is just him crawling up the wall. At one instance, he shoots the 2 web lines to pull himself forward, but it does like a very tiny little bit of a jump with it, and that's it. We've seen Spider-Man before do that, like stretch it back and catapult himself. They could have at least done that. I mean, there was not very much of that iconic Spider-Man action, which leads me into the action part of the movie. Was the action good? Yes, it was fine. It was well choreographed. It was good for the most part, but again, very little Spider-Man action. Like, the most we got out of it was him whipping web onto people's hands and making them stick to things. That happened like 3 or 4 times at least, the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. But otherwise, he was just kind of swinging around and hitting people with web, not doing much. It was very disappointing for me in the action in that regard. There's no iconic Spider-Man action, and that's what bugged me. It was fine for a generic type of action scene, but every scene I'm like, do this, do that, and he didn't do it. He didn't do it. Yeah, just bummed me out. I wanted to see so much more of the iconic stuff. It felt like they kind of just let Tom Holland carry the movie, and they didn't really worry about making it that good otherwise. It's fine, but I feel like they phoned it in a lot of ways. And I know that's not going to be a popular opinion. I know the movie did really well, both by critics and viewers, but that doesn't change the fact that these things I'm saying are still true. It's not like a subjective thing other than me saying I wanted more. It wasn't in there, so you can like it or not. That's fine. It doesn't really matter, but that's my take on it. I will say the humor in this movie was really good, both from Spider-Man and the other characters like Ned or whoever else. It felt right. It felt good in the movie. It didn't seem out of place too much, so I thought that was pretty good. I will say, though, a lot of the humor from Happy and that whole interaction, it was just weird. Because, yeah, he's still just a kid, but he's telling them about these very serious things, and they're hanging up on him and not listening to him and everything. The most he got out of Iron Man was, yeah, I called the FBI. These people are out there potentially killing lots and lots of people with these weapons, and they're just kind of shooing him away, saying, stop bothering us. Like, that part didn't really make sense, and I think they did it mostly for humor, and it just didn't really help the story is all. So, I don't know how I feel about that. The last thing I want to talk about is the CGI. The CGI was fantastic. For the most part, Vulture looked great. The suit was awesome with the big wings and everything. So well done. Very, very cool. Spider-Man, for the most part, looked really good also. Obviously, it was really high-level CGI. I mean, you could see the texture in the suit and stuff, but for a lot of the close-ups, it did seem a little weird. So, I mean, it wasn't bad, but it is CGI, and sometimes you could tell, so no big deal there. So that's about it. I mean, it was a really solid film. I enjoyed it for the most part, and I liked it, and I know that it's going to do really well. But there's still a lot of room for improvement. Another thing I just remembered I want to mention touch on briefly, origin story. He starts off with this Iron Man built, Tony Stark built suit that we saw in Civil War, and he uses it, and then he gets downgraded for reasons I'm not going to get into it, to his homemade suit halfway through the movie, and that's like the rest of the movie. They went backwards to an extent in this origin story for Spider-Man, and then at the end they show this really incredible suit, which they just touch on it, and that's it, and then he goes back to his regular normal suit from Iron Man. So it's like there wasn't that much development for him. Like, I feel like the movie actually went backwards in order to create this development for him, and now he's back to the same level that he was at in Civil War. It felt very forced to me that they made this such a developmental storyline for him. Again, I get that he's a kid, but I feel like the way they handled it was just a little iffy. So, yeah, the movie was really solid, but it definitely has room for improvement, and that's where I'm going to leave it. I'd like to know what you guys thought. I'm sure a lot of you are going to tell me I'm wrong, but the things I said, I tried to keep it as objective as possible and just throw in my 2 cents at the end. So hopefully we can have some interesting discussion in the comment section below. So there it is, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I have new videos up every single day. We talk about action figures, movies, TV shows, video games, all kinds of fun stuff. So make sure you come back for that. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, and in the meantime, keep collecting.